Hello, everyone. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to start logging on, but I'm going to go my usual beginning spiel while you all log on. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. If you're tuning in for the first time, this is the La Maison de Rouge Monday night weekly live broadcast. I am your host, Lucy Sweetkill, one half of the duo that is La Maison de Rouge. A little bit about who we are. LMDR is dedicated to expanding the BDSM experience by discussing, educating, and informing our audiences about the intersections of kink, wellness, sexuality, spirituality, and social activism. We aim to create a safe space for discussing these topics, as well as providing an avenue for our guests to share their stories and experiences. Thank you again for joining us. Tonight, our guest is Vanessa Carlisle, who has a PhD in writing and gender studies and an ass that has paid her bills for over 20 years. I love that. Vanessa co-founded the Hookers Army, a self-defense and peer support collective for sex workers, and writes both fiction and nonfiction. As a queer femme Domme author, death doula, activist, and educator, Vanessa works for big change while celebrating the beauty and complexity of her communities here and now. Please welcome pronouns she, they, Vanessa Carlisle. Hello, Vanessa. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lucy. That was beautifully done.
I need this, an ass that's paid your bills. I love that. And we'll definitely get into all of those things too.
It's the truth.
So thank you for joining us. As people start to log in, when we have a new guest on our show, the first question we always like to ask, and sorry if you're all hearing the New York siren noises, but is your origin story. So obviously, you most probably weren't given the option in school to put a, hooker army together or, do half really all the things that you've been doing beyond an author. So how did you get to where you are now? You can go as far back as you would like. If you've connected the dots that got you to this place, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, thanks. It's such a hard question to answer, right? You want to distill yourself well. But I can say that right now, the work that I am doing is the most kind of integrated it's ever been. So I was a student in college. I went to a private school that my family really couldn't afford. So we took out a lot of loans. I was like the only person I knew on work study at this place. I was working a lot and I was nannying.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get these kids to school. And then I was going to school. It just was like not working for me. And I had a friend who was stripping at a club in Portland, Oregon, where I was living. And I was like, I just think I want to do it. I was like, I want to wear the stuff. I want to be cute. I want the money. Like I wanted all of the things. And so I auditioned. And immediately within a month, I had to quit because I was working on a project with my sister and our publisher said, no way. If anyone finds out that you're stripping, this was 1998. So if anyone finds out that you're stripping, it's over for this project. And because we had a publisher and we were working on this thing, I was like, okay. So I put it down and, but it didn't put me down. You know what I mean? Like I never quite was finished with it. So I went back to dancing and I danced through college. I came home. So I started my work as a stripper. And one thing that when I transitioned into doing Dom work, one thing that I really remembered was that my clients, the people who would come to see me regularly, because I stripped on and off for 12 years, the people who would come to see me were the men who liked to sit on their hands. right?
Wow.
Like they were the clients who really loved getting teased and then not getting to touch me and not getting, not getting satisfaction, fulfillment, whatever we want to
Yeah.
call. They would come to the club and they would adore that feeling of being just like stuck, right? And so those were my clients as a stripper. And so it was an interesting transition for me eventually into Dom work to realize that like I'd actually been sort of attracting, like that was the energy I'd been working with all along, even when I was doing a kind of younger, cuter version of it. So, but I've done a lot of different types of work all in the whole, like my life has involved, I think I counted at one point at least 8 different forms of sex work. I'm out with my legal name as a sex worker and a sex worker advocate and educator. And I know that's different from most people. I was outed about 10 years ago, and I had to make a choice about whether I was going to do what I was doing out loud using my legal name, or if I was going to try to, stay, like walk it all back and stay safe.
Yeah.
And so unlike a lot of other sex worker activists, I do things under my legal name that are public. Yeah. And my work, my sex work is actually much more private. So.
Wow. Yeah. So then stripping for a long time and doing all the different types of sex work. Mm-hmm. How did that get into, how did you start the Hookers Army, because I think that's really amazing as self-defense and peer support collective. Was that out of something that happened to you or just something you were seeing?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. It's a hard one too, but it's very real, right? Like, so for people who are familiar with the book, We Too, that was published by the Feminist Press last year. Yeah. I wrote about the Hookers Army for that collection. So you can kind of go look at the history of it a little bit if you're interested in deeper story there. My good friend, Lauren Kiley, the dirty girl next door. She's an adorable and amazing model, and she just does incredible, beautiful work. She's the cutest. She and I became friends, and we'd been working on some other projects together. I guess the shortest way to answer this, I've experienced many forms of violence in my life. And at the time that I was starting to get some self-defense training, I was doing it for myself. I was doing it to try to get to a different place with my sense of threat perception in the world. I was feeling threatened a lot of the time, and I wanted my body to calm down. And regular therapy was only going so far. I knew I needed a somatic practice, a body practice that was going to help me feel more confident and competent in my body. Yeah. So I started training in self-defense, and I found that I loved the physical practice, but there was so much like bullshit rhetoric going on. Like I didn't like the way they talked about gender. I didn't like the way they talked about how violence happens. I felt victim blamed a lot. Very clearly, I wasn't welcome to tell my story as a sex worker. No one talked about violence that came from the cops, So it took some time, but I found a collective to train with that felt safer. And I looked at their model. They were in the Bay. And I looked at their model. They were in Oakland, California. So I'm in California. They were in Oakland, California. And they were called Girl Army. And they had this little anarchistic collective. And they were queer and they were wonderful. And I felt really welcomed there. So when I moved back to LA, I hooked up with my friend Lauren, and I was like, what do you think? And we had another friend, Danny Cruz, who was really into it. And so we just started meeting in a park, and I started the long path of training a martial art, and then started moving those techniques toward my community. So I have a martial art practice that is like, more traditional. I have a sensei. I train 3-4 days a week. And then I also have this self-defense practice where I teach self-defense techniques. I will teach self-defense to anyone who wants to learn, basically. But I have the sex worker specific Hooker's Army where we process trauma, take care of each other, you know, make space for how's it going? How's work?
Yeah.
And then, you know, we haven't been training in person during COVID, but I did do an in-person training recently for sex workers in LA that was really great. And, you know, so we combine that sort of holding space for peer support and talking about work, and then also working on boundary setting. You know, it's not all just punching and kicking. Like it's you know, it's self-defense in the broadest way we can imagine it, which is anything that sort of supports us feeling strong and cared for in our lives.
That's fucking amazing. Like, it is like, you know, self-defense for those who are in any sort of marginalized community is super important. But then, like, on top of that, like, in the community we live in, where unfortunately there is a high rate of violence towards sex workers, and especially sex workers, you know, POC sex workers, right? And feeling like you have some physical control around that, you know, because you can have the mental control only goes so far, right? You have to feel comfortable in your body and pushing back and feel strong in that, especially, you know, because I'm like, for me specifically, like I'm a small, petite person. I'm, you know, 5'3", and, you know, 110 pounds, you know. Yeah, I'm like a very petite person, but, you know, something that I've always, I took boxing for a really long time, and had a coach like in the ring boxing, because I wanted to feel, boxing and kickboxing, I wanted to feel like my petite kind of small frame was not going to hold me back. And I had a really scary incident where I don't do fantasy wrestling anymore, or any sort of wrestling as a fetish activity, because I had, unfortunately, a client who had pinned me down and tried to choke me out. And it was supposed to be, and thankfully, because I literally put my knees in between us and used my legs to like shove him off, because I had been doing so much like leg work and a lot of like the kickboxing, and it was almost like I knew that was the thing that, like, if I didn't feel like strong in my body, I don't know if I would have been able to get him off.
Right.
You know?
Thank you for sharing that story. And I'm sorry that happened to you. That sounds terrible.
Yeah. And what you're doing, though, is giving folks that strength, right? So I think this is so fucking amazing, and we need to see more of it.
It's interesting too, because what you're describing, especially a choke out, right, is like a really common attack. And it's also a very panic inducing attack. So if somebody chokes you and you're not expecting it and you didn't consent to it, it can make you absolutely panic in the moment and not be able to respond, right?
Yeah.
It's not really normal to freeze. And so one of the things we do in the Hooker's Army is just normalize that freeze response, like, you know, really lay in some gentleness and care for the times when something happened that we didn't do anything about it, because that's a neurological event. It's like you're not actually in control of whether you fight back or not a lot of the time. And the choke response, like, you know, it's actually a hold that can be broken. Even if you're much smaller than your attacker. It's about leverage. It's about figuring out, you know, where is the hold the weakest. So I teach a couple of different ways to break a choke. And I teach it early, even though choking is scary, and even though it has that kind of panicky edge, because it is something that you can escape. I teach it early to kind of build in a little bit of that confidence that, like, oh, something this bad could happen and I could still win, right?
Yeah.
Because the instant you escape and are safe and away from the situation, I call that a win.
Yeah.
I don't
That
care
is
how
a
messy
fucking
it
win.
was before you got out. Like, if you got out and you're alive today, you won.
What? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I think is so amazing of what you're doing, because there are a lot of people in our line of work that are petite, that
Yeah.
are smaller, and if we're dealing with, a lot of us have, it's cis women with cis male clients,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever your, gender identity is. I guarantee you're mostly dealing with cis male clients too,
Mm-hmm.
and there's just like sometimes you just have that like weight, right?
Right.
That is going to be the difference,
Right.
just alone, the height, the weight, all of that.
Right. And it can feel very intimidating to address that difference. And
Yeah.
the martial art that I practice is a form of Japanese Hawaiian jiu-jitsu, and the lineage is very much it was created in the 1920s and 30s in Hawaii. And the founder of the art, the whole point was that he wanted to create an art that he could teach to almost anybody, that smaller bodies could prevail against larger bodies. He was teaching women when lots of people weren't teaching women. And his concept was, if you're using technique and if you're using someone's weight and their momentum against them,
Yeah.
that's how you can, maneuver a situation. So I tell people, we don't fight force against force. Some martial arts do, and that's what's pleasurable about them, and that's what's beautiful about them. It's not a judgment on any other art. But we don't fight force against force. We take force that's coming at us and we reposition it.
Yeah.
We use it. We say yes to whatever's going on. And then we have our own idea about what's going to happen to that energy next.
Yeah.
And that's that principle of sort of, getting off the line of an attack and then figuring out what I'm going to do next to create space for myself to escape. Like that, as a kind of general life principle, has been super helpful. And that in that way that, martial arts tend to sort of trickle into the rest of your life, So I've been really grateful for that.
That's awesome, and doing some really amazing things. So now I want to get on to another, because you've got so many really great things. So as a writer,
yeah,
was that originally what you went to school for, right? Because it seems the most traditional of the titles you have as a writer, or is that something that came later? And can you tell us about your work as a writer?
Thank you. I'm, a person who's been writing since I was very young and didn't think I could make a life of it. And didn't actually believe in trying to really train it and develop a craft until I was a little bit older. But I do have a master's of fine arts and a PhD in creative writing now. So I did follow that sort of traditional path, and it's interesting because now I feel like I'm unlearning a lot in order to recover some joy with it. So, it goes through ups and downs. I never stop writing, even in some of the darkest periods of my life, when I was being hurt physically by a partner, when I was, very rarely sober, like even when I've been in like some very, very difficult times, writing was never a question. Like, I write. So now I'm living in a way that allows that to be more a part of how I support myself and how I, like more of what I create in the world, as opposed to just doing it for myself.
Yeah. Well, and you participated in writing about it for the We Too book as well.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say your writing does have a lot of sex work, a focus in sex work for you?
It does right now, for sure. Yeah, for sure. My novel, Take Me With You, came out in June. The protagonist is a sex worker. And, it's there. We don't have a lot of them. We don't have a lot of novels with our people at the center, with sex work as just like part of their life. Like the sex work in the book is not the difficult part of the book. Honestly, it's not the tragedy of the book, right? There's hard stuff in the book, but the but the hooker parts aren't the hard parts. So, it's an interesting thing. It's like, yes, I focus on sex work. Yes, I write about sex work. I just had a piece in the South Atlantic Quarterly, edited by Heather Berg, who I also am really grateful for. And that essay is it's an academic piece. It's one of my few really full on academic jargony pieces about how sex work and labor rights, how the sex worker movement uses the labor rights framework.
Yeah.
So yeah, I write about sex work all the time, but I also really love having sex work just be part of the fabric of the writing, as opposed to we are now going to psychologically break apart everything that has to do with the sex work of this character, because what's wrong with her?
Yeah. I love that though. I love that you're just making it as a job, right? Like any other protagonist, sometimes they're like, I'm a lawyer, and it's not really about her being a lawyer, right? It's about her life, and there are aspects of lawyerness that come into it.
Right.
Yeah.
And changes how you see certain things, and it changes what your priorities are and what you're attending to. And if you're a sex worker who brings in a lot of money, you have a very different way of thinking about sex work than if you're a sex worker who's still really having to kind of live month to month or even day to day, right? Yeah. And so even saying I have a sex worker protagonist, I feel like I should be clear, this is a sex worker protagonist who goes through some ups and downs with whether sex work is really supporting her or not.
Yeah. And
that's also been part of my journey and the journey of a lot of other people I know, where we have times where it's stable, it's working out, we've got it on lock. And then there's other times where we're like, oh, this is really scary. That's I might need another idea.
The pandemic, right? For a lot of us, we're like, okay, this has shifted things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now moving on to some of your other items that I'm very curious about, and I think our audience will be very, very curious about, is your, death doula.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have taken some lectures around it, but most people might, because I have a morbid interest. So, but explain, many people don't know what that is. And I would love to know, first off, what got you to go even down that road? Yeah. What is it and why did you go down that road?
Got it. So death doulas come in many different stripes. There's lots of different ways to do the work, but in general, a death doula is a person who's providing non-medical support to the dying and their circles of loved ones, family, friends, support. So a death doula can come in kind of at any point in the process, prior to a diagnosis, around the time of being ill, deathbed, vigil support, post-death, wrapping up of affairs. Some death doulas like me are also celebrants who will do memorials or home funerals. There's lots of different things that a death doula can do, and each one kind of has their own, I would say, cluster of services that they provide. I was trained through Going with Grace, which is a death doula training program in LA that I really loved. It's headed by Elua Arthur. And then I did the national exam, and so I kind of like collecting credentials. It's a thing I like.
You're a learner,
That's right, lifelong learner.
Yeah.
And I got into it because I had a good friend who had been dealing with her cancer for a couple of years, and she had gotten a terminal diagnosis, and I had the sense of I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to help here.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be useful. And I also wanted to know more without making her be the one to teach me.
Yeah.
So I just looked for a training program, and it just sort of turned out that right around the time that she was dying, I went through my program. COVID hit immediately. And then during COVID, I cared for my grandmother through the end of her life. And I've been, working with clients for a couple of years now as a death doula, that every single person that I've worked with as a death doula knows they're getting an old hooker for a death doula. So like I do death work for people who don't really feel comfortable calling on a lot of other people who do death work, right? Like I'm a person who shows up with my tattoos and my drug history and like whatever you're bringing to the table with your dying time, like I'm here non-judgmentally.
Yeah.
So I have like these death and dying and grieving kind of skill sets, but I come from communities where that sort of support is like often not it's not offered, because that kind of support usually comes from more religious places, right?
Yeah.
So so I'm kind of like, it's not a huge transition for me personally, although it's like sex work, death work, like, are those even related? And I'm like, oh yes, they are. Like, I see it. Because they have to do with taboos. They have to do with silences in our culture. It has to do with the body and our terrors around the body as a culture, right? So I see a lot of places where years of doing sex work and studying sex work have really informed my death care practices. And it also is part of transitioning. I'm in my 40s now. I'm just feeling myself differently than I did as a sex worker earlier. My Domme life is different. My sense of what my role is different, and death work really appeared to me as a way to move next.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's quite interconnected, like what you were saying, dealing with things that are really taboo, things that, being able to communicate things that are very hard for people to talk about.
Yeah.
In general, I feel like sex and death actually go hand in hand. Like no one wants to talk about it, and they feel all these things, but it's part of life, and there's all this complication around it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And the intense irrationality of living in a culture that refuses to talk about the inevitable
Yeah.
is just crazy making. Like, I think it makes people extremely anxious.
Yeah.
So, being a person who's already had all these years of like seeing bodies in altered states and strong feelings and, intense sensation, and like being able to sort of navigate that in a non-medical way, right?
Yeah.
And understanding for myself that pleasure is a complex thing that can occur in almost any circumstance in a way that we don't always know how to box that up in our mind.
Yeah.
So I want to come into scenes where there's death, dying, grieving, loss, where that's happening, really being able to hold the complexities of all the feelings that occur there.
Yeah.
It's fine to have a moment at the bedside of a loved one where all you can think about is the way that they chewed and how much you hated it, and like laughing your ass off about that for a second. Now you're crying because now you're back in the moment where you're going to miss them. And that sort of roller coaster, that's what's normal. That's actually what's normal. So, being a sex worker who's seen people kind of like in their wild stuff really prepared me for it. It was like, oh yeah, okay, this is a trip. Like, this is a trip. This is the trip.
The trip. Definitely the trip. I think it's what people think is appropriate, right? That's the thing, is they're like, this is not appropriate. And like people have that same sense as a sex worker, right? Like people are like, is it appropriate for me to laugh during this time? And it's like, yeah, is it appropriate for me to cry, laugh, then cry, then this, then that, feel fear, but then get aroused from fear? And then,
Yeah.
we're always working with all the emotions and the roller coasters of emotions. And, I feel like end of life times, you don't know what's going to go through your mind. And sometimes maybe that thought is like, damn, that was some good dick when I was younger, and you want to be able to say it, I think, at the end of your life, or whatever it is,
Yeah. I'll tell you a quick story about this person who I supported her at the end of her life. She chose to use the Death with Dignity law in Oregon. She had ALS, and her name was Sandy. And so she knew her day and time. She had planned her death.
Yeah.
And she had support from her family, and she had an excellent doctor, and she had done what she needed to do to set it up. But the days before were really challenging emotionally and also physically. She was having very strong, difficult symptoms. The day before her death, we were trying to figure out how to offer her some comfort, something that would like help her kind of relax a little bit. And so there were her niece, myself, and one of her dear friends. We offered her a bath in bed.
Yeah.
And so we had these warm washcloths, we had, scented oils, and we gave her this like kind of awesome, like massagey, full body bath in her bed. And I will never forget, her arms in the air and her big smile. And she just said, "This feels so good." And I was just like, that is what I am here for. Like, that is what I want to cultivate for people towards the end of life, are moments of that as much as they can get them.
Damn, that's really beautiful. That's really, really beautiful. Like, that is so moving. I feel like those are the moments also, like, I could see why you're so drawn to this, because those are also moments in sex work, right? When someone for the first time experienced something so freeing that they've held in for so long, especially those who have kinks and fetishes, who are like, oh my God, like just transcendent experience to actually be themselves fully, authentically in stuff that they hold so much shame around.
Absolutely. I feel like I've seen that sort of, sparkle eyes in BDSM clients where they're like, I never knew.
What?
And you're like,
yes. Is this possible? It's like,
right.
Yeah, that's so, it's like a full circle that you are really offering, like pleasure and comfort and love in every aspect of someone's life. Like, I feel like that's the theme of everything you're doing, which is like, feeling comfort and support in your self-defense and feeling connected in your body, to feeling pleasure and love and, acceptance in your sex work, into feeling comfort and loved and cared for end of life.
Thank you for saying that.
I definitely see this like really beautiful theme of connection, And I think some people might be like, whoa, you have all these different things, but they are really all connected. They are truly all connected, because it comes down to the emotion, and it's like emotion of love and pleasure and support.
Yeah. And opening, right?
Yeah.
Like trying to sort of have, I see if I can describe this experience. I just talked with a client who had like a big psilocybin experience recently. So I have some mushroom logic on the brain, but I'm thinking about the ways that a lot of what I do, even when I was just a stripper,
Yeah.
that there was a sense of like opening up the possibilities of this night, opening up the possibilities of, what could we do that would make this memorable?
Yeah.
Like that's always been sort of my, my desire is to like really like do something that later on I'm like, wow, we thought of that. That was special for us,
Living your fullest life all the way to the end.
Yeah.
Living your life of like just fully living it. I
Yeah.
think that's as authentic and as cared for as possible. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. So where do you see yourself going from here?
Well, I am working on a really cool nonfiction project right now. I am ghostwriting, but I'm allowed to talk
Ooh.
about it because it's kind of a special. It's a cool arrangement. So
Yeah.
I don't have to keep secret about it. But I'm writing with a woman named Stephanie Covington who does work in women's prisons. She's been doing healing work in women's prisons for years. So I'm an abolitionist, and I was very suspicious of her when I met her.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, in the system, though. And it turns out she's amazing, and the work she does is incredible. And so I'm helping her with a book project and doing all these interviews with people who are formerly incarcerated. So that's a project I'm working on right now as a writer. That's sort of the writer activist is getting to really tinker there. My novel, I'm going to hold it up because that is a thing you have to do when you are promoting a book is like people look at it. So this is my novel. It's called Take Me With You. That I'm still, trying to just keep on getting my book about a sex worker out there in the world. And I'm working on a new project that's fiction for myself as well. And then the death doula work is like, I just ran a grief circle for some people who lost a friend, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm teaching a class in 2 weeks with Going with Grace about using your breath as a death worker to create more space for yourself, learning how to use breath to ground yourself and your clients.
Yeah.
And that's stuff that that first started happening. Like I first started getting interested in breath work as a Domme.
Yeah.
And now I'm using it in this other area and training it in this other area. So, it's like all of the things are still talking to each other, and I'm still moving forward with them all. So.
Oh, that's awesome. So, you've got a lot of things kind of in the fire too, that are going to be coming out. I want to, and for those of you who are obviously listening, before we open it up to questions, we have Vanessa's website and social, if you look below. So your website, your Twitter, and your Instagram, which is where they can get more information about, your book, your writings, and just your work all around. So that is the best way to connect. So I do want to open it up to questions from our audience. So if anyone has questions, please put it in the comment box or the question box. And as long as it's respectful, I will pop it on the screen and ask the question, because some people are not. So some are just not even questions. Let's see. Well, we had some good comments, which were like, thank you for sharing. My greatest fear is not being able to defend myself from an emergency situation. Appreciate you too. So I guess here's a question that I can ask from this comment. What is one thing that maybe, I know it's hard because you're not able to show, but just kind of talking about, is there one thing that you recommend for those out there who they could do to feel like they could defend themselves? Is there one advice you think that could be helpful, or any advice.
Yeah. So I think of self-defense as an ongoing practice, right? So if you think of, I'm going to be a person who takes care of myself and defends myself from harm. If you start laying in that thought, then the techniques, the physical techniques, maybe you learn how to do a little bit more situational awareness where you're willing to look behind you occasionally as you walk, right? There's simple things you can start to lay into your habits. But the main thing that I would say is start a habit change where you commit to your own body and your own well-being in a new way, that you're going to forgive whatever you might have done in the past. You're going to be compassionate toward whatever response you had in the past to, harm coming.
Yeah.
And you're going to be committed now to going forward. You're going to take care, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean harm still won't come. This isn't about blaming anyone for the stuff that happens. It happens.
Yeah.
But it is a different mindset to think of yourself as being in a self-defense practice and just learning, here and there as you go.
That's really great. Yeah. I think I really like what you said about like being okay looking behind you. I think there's something about us, especially women, who feel like, oh, I don't want to be offensive or rude by looking behind me and like wondering who's behind me, right? Like
Oh, right. Yeah.
there's like this image conscious thing of like not being rude. Actually, it was a really great line. So, what's called Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the movie that they made, there's a really great line he says in there where she knew she was kind of in danger, and he actually says, you're in danger, but because you were so afraid of offending, you didn't get yourself out of this situation. Now you're in this situation, and I really like resonated with that, where you like sometimes don't turn around, or you sometimes don't cross the street or something because you feel like that other person is going to get offended by you wanting your space from them, and you should feel comfortable with that.
And that's hard too, because we all know that if somebody's going to be predatory, making them angry can actually be bad for us, right? Like, so you do have a real tension around not wanting to offend somebody. It's not just like, it's, I mean, I get called a bitch all the time because of the things that I say and do, because I'm not afraid to stand up, look someone in the eye. I see you there, like I do a lot of that now. I didn't used to. And it was partly because I wasn't able to really handle someone escalating.
Yeah.
And you do have the risk of someone escalating if you make eye contact and say, I see you, you're too close to me, back up, right? Yeah. You have a risk of an escalation there if you do that. But you also have, what's more likely to happen is actually that the person goes, whoa, all right, bitch, whatever, and then backs up.
Yeah.
Like you told them to.
Yeah. There's a combination. Yeah. Like the talking thing, but for me, it's more about like, I used to like feel bad, like, oh, they're going to wonder why I'm looking at them. Yeah. So now I just kind of like, I turn around just to check my spacing, and then I just cross the street. I don't engage, but I like put myself in a better place, even though there's a part of me that feels like, oh, they're going to wonder why I crossed the street, And I'm like, I don't care. Like, just do that thing,
Yeah. Yeah. I think COVID's been a really interesting crash course in all of this, right? Where it's like, I still keep 6 foot distance with people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what they think about it, but there's social pressures around these kinds of things. And we're all having to negotiate those social pressures.
Definitely. We have a really great question. You wear so many hats and do so many things. When do you find the time for yourself, or is your work your reward?
I love that question. Thank you for asking about how I support my own well-being. A lot of the work that I do does feed me, but it is also work that requires a lot of attention and focus. So I am very protective of my downtime, and I do schedule it, and I do a lot of body work. I'm like routinely getting body work. If there's hot water somewhere, I'm in it. I'm a hot tub, mineral spring, like I'm that person. So I do some kind of classic shit,
Yeah.
but I also am just very protective. If I've scheduled time, that's I'm not working. I will do it. I will take that time. I am, as you might suspect, more guilty of overscheduling than underscheduling. So I have to really keep my mind on, like, when's your next day off, Vanessa? Put it on the calendar and then take it.
Yeah, that's good. I think the scheduling, I fall in your boat, and so I have to schedule time off.
Yep.
And for those of you out there, a lot of sex workers have a tendency to overwork and overdo because we run our own business, right? Schedule your time off. You have to schedule it in,
Absolutely. Yes.
I think we get lost in it, because we do a lot of us do love what we do. And so then you're just like, okay. And then all of a sudden, for some people who work for themselves, you're like, wait, I actually haven't had like a day off,
It feels bad. You feel really guilty and crazy trying to do it. Like, and I think, like I said, I'm in my 40s now. My body will just tell me in a way that in my 20s and early 30s, I could get away with it. I could get away with late night after late night. I could get away with drinking more. I could get, like I could do things with my body that now my body's like, no, like, like I actually have to take better care of myself now.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of grateful for it because it's changed my priorities have had to change. So,
yeah. I agree with that. Body now is just like, nope, we're going down, and we're going to go down now. So
you're done. Yeah.
We have another great question. Is death doula service covered by Medicare, Medicaid, other insurance? Great interview.
Oh, thank you, SH. In the US, generally, no. There are quite a few places in Canada where it is, because doulas are sometimes part of hospice in Canada. So I don't know where you are, but in general, in the US, doulas are not covered by insurance. If your doula is also trained medically, sometimes you can figure that out, right? So sometimes people will be a hospice nurse and then they'll transition into doula work. And sometimes they can work that out. But in general, doulas are not, they're an out-of-pocket expense. Most of us have a very like sliding scale mentality. So most of us will work with, if somebody wants the support, we will work with them to make it happen.
That's great. Yeah, that's something that hopefully over the years will change, right? Adding these in. We have another great question from Bobcat, which is, if you could go back to when you were just starting out in sex work, what advice would you give yourself?
This is so interesting because I got this exact same question at a college class that I did like a week ago. And I'm going to give you the same answer because I've been thinking about it a lot, which is I would have told myself not to compare my eating habits to the girls around me. Because I started out working as a dancer, I was in dressing rooms a lot and I was surrounded by pretty significant eating difficulty, some outright disordered.
Yeah.
And my body, I'm just a rounder. I'm rounder. And my relationship with food was fraught. And I think the advice that I would give, and I've done a lot of work with it, but I think the advice that I would give my earlier self is like, watch that. Keep an eye out for that. Almonds are not lunch.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much for kind of bringing that up. We've had this question a lot, which is a great question. And you are the first to actually bring up something that I don't think gets actually talked about a lot, of these like body standard kind of comparison. Like, sex work, unfortunately, is fraught with, these body image issues of like having to look a certain way. And I think it's getting a little, it's getting better, but there's still that. And I remember when I started out as a Dom, I started at a house. They, if you were not the weight you were supposed to be, and they would, weigh the ladies. If
Oof.
you weren't, they would take you off schedule. And so they would
Oof.
fuck with your money.
Yeah.
And they were giving some of the girls like, quick fix options, which were like really bad diet pills. And I basically agreed to take the girls who were having trouble with the weight stuff. And I was like, I'm going to, let's go to the gym. Let's get a healthy practice together. I will work out with you and all of that, because I didn't want them on these like these like diet pills. And this is quite common,
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we're living in, as sex workers, we're living in a beauty culture amplified, right? And so, of course, the issues of how you interact with that culture, it's extremely ableist. We all know it's racist. We all know, we know it's got these things going on, but we're still just trying to navigate it, all of us, right?
Yeah.
And the prejudice against bigger bodies. Yeah, I hope that that's changing. I do believe that's changing, just because people are getting more access to more types of bodies.
Yeah.
In porn, especially. So they're starting to see more bodies interact, and they're like, feeling that. And I think that's wonderful, because it means that more people can show up, more authentically in their body. But I'm also just, and I don't have anything to say against anyone wanting to do body modification of any kind. Like, I don't, this is not a blanket statement for anybody. Anybody who wants to do body mod of any kind, whether it's gain weight, lose weight, tattoos, injections, whatever. I know that I witnessed a lot of pain around food and weight. And I just have grief about that. So for my own self, looking back at my own self, I would tell me to be a little more mindful of what my relationship with food was like.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that was really, really important. So thank you for like bringing up something that doesn't always get talked about and covered in what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was actually our last question, and a really amazing answer. So Vanessa, is there anything that you want, go ahead and promote your book again, but is there anything, other project, you're totally welcome to, any other projects out there that you want people to like stay connected with you, or, look forward to as well?
Yeah, thank you. So my novel is called Take Me With You. Buy it, review it. I'm independent. I have a small publisher, so help us out. It's a great Christmas gift. I think probably the thing that I would say is, we're at a really crucial time for all content creators. And I don't do a lot of social media content. I do some. I'm present, but I'm not doing a ton of content creation there. So if you're a person who wants to interact with me, the best way is to be supportive of the work I'm putting out, and so, and I think there's actually a lot of us out there that are like that, where social media isn't actually our number one place where we do stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm teaching classes always. I'm publishing things. I'm out here doing stuff, and I appreciate the interaction. I appreciate people approaching me, respectfully about the work that I do always.
Awesome. And then for all of you, look below. We have Vanessa's website, Twitter, and Instagram as well, you can find all the information there. I want to thank you, Vanessa, for being on our show. And really, this was an amazing, amazing interview, and all the things you're doing. It's really crazy amazing.
I really appreciate your questions, and I'm just honored. I'm honored to be here with you, Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you. And then for all of you out there, thank you for joining us live. And then for those of you who will watch this in the future, again, La Maison de Rouge has a YouTube channel, and this is where it will remain, hopefully forever. Have a great night, everyone, and goodbye, and join us next Monday. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.